Putin made a fatal mistake. He went all in for victory in Ukraine. He pulled the vast majority of 30,000 troops from the Leningrad military district, from St. Petersburg, from the Finnish border, and above all from Kaliningrad to the Ukrainian front. Among them was the 11th Army Corps, an elite force of 12,000 built 6 years earlier specifically to defend Kaliningrad. The Kremlin ripped this corps out of Kaliningrad and sent it to Ukraine and paid a heavy price for it. The units that once formed the densest concentration of Russian military power on NATO territory, facing the Baltic states and southern Finland, were melting away in the mud of Donbass. The skeleton crew left behind was in no condition to defend Kaliningrad, and the ones who saw this most clearly were NATO. The alliance's most senior general summed up the situation in a single sentence: if you truly believed NATO was massing on your border, you wouldn't pull these troops. The NATO threat was always an excuse, not a cause. NATO is a defensive alliance. We are not a threat to Russia, and they know we're not a threat to Russia. If they thought we were a threat to Russia, they wouldn't have emptied the Leningrad military district to go on and invade Ukraine. Putin left Kaliningrad defenseless. Now, the bill for that void is coming due. The first item on that bill is military. Finnish intelligence laid bare the scale of the void. Satellite imagery monitoring Russian garrisons near the border showed the bases were essentially empty. 80% of equipment and personnel had been transferred to Ukraine. In some garrisons, a fifth of the personnel remained. In others, even less. Finnish intelligence officials said Russia is scaring NATO countries with World War III, but at least near Finland, it doesn't appear to be preparing for war. Satellite images don't lie. The bases are empty. Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski confirmed the same picture. Russia has withdrawn the vast majority of troops from Kaliningrad. Lithuania's defense ministry reported that units had been shifted to the Kursk front. The units built to defend Kaliningrad were now dying in another war in another country. And it wasn't just infantry that was pulled. British intelligence had previously confirmed a striking development. Russia removed some of its S-400 air defense systems from Kaliningrad and sent them to the front to compensate for losses in Ukraine. The S-400 was Kaliningrad's air defense umbrella. With a 400-kilometer range, it controlled much of Lithuanian and Polish airspace. The British intelligence assessment summarized the gravity of the situation. The fact that the Ministry of Defense is willing to accept additional risk in Kaliningrad highlights the overstretch the war has caused for Russia's key modern capabilities. At the same time, Kaliningrad's heaviest mechanized unit, the 336th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade, was also deployed to Ukraine. According to Defense Viewpoint's April 2026 assessment, the naval infantry has been so depleted that reconstitution will take years. Putin didn't just send Kaliningrad soldiers to Ukraine. He spent its defensive shield too. Russia recognized the void, but its solution created a new contradiction. In 2024, the 44th Army Corps was established in the Republic of Karelia, and the Soviet-era garrison in Petrozavodsk began to be renovated. New barracks, training areas, and military vehicle depots are being built 160 kilometers from the Finnish border. In Kandalaksha, just 100 kilometers from the Finnish border, garrison construction for new artillery and engineer brigades is progressing. The plan looks impressive on paper, a new corps of 15,000 troops, but reality is different. According to intelligence reports, most of the 44th Corps soldiers are currently fighting in Ukraine, including in the Kharkiv region. Petrozavodsk is still a construction site. Buildings in Kandalaksha are at foundation level. The motorized rifle brigade in Luga was upgraded to division level, expanded to 8,000 to 10,000 troops, but in the fall of 2025, that unit's equipment was also sent to the Ukrainian front. Russia is building new units with one hand and sending the units it builds to Ukraine with the other. The hole keeps being patched, but every patch opens a new hole. And this military void is no longer theoretical. It's producing consequences. Russia is aware of the threat and trying to prepare. On May 20th, satellite imagery revealed new construction at Kaliningrad's most critical military airbase at Chkalovsk Naval Aviation Base, just 4 kilometers northwest of the city. Construction of 4 protective aircraft shelters had begun. This base houses Russia's Baltic Fleet Aviation Unit and the 689th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, with Su-30SM and Su-24M fighter aircraft stationed here. With some of the S-400s pulled to Ukraine, these aircraft are no longer as protected as they once were, and Russia knows it. The shelters are designed against drone attacks, but analysts note they are made of profiled metal sheeting and would provide limited protection against a real attack. Yet the shelter construction itself is an admission. Russia now accepts that its aircraft in Kaliningrad are vulnerable to attack. 5 days later, that admission turned into a concrete alarm. On May 25, 2026, for the first time since the start of the war, Kaliningrad's Kryvyi airport was shut down. Dozens of civilian aircraft were circling in the sky, unable to land. Russia's emergency warning system issued a UAV threat alert for the region, and Rosaviatsia activated the cover plan, an emergency procedure implemented when flight safety is threatened. Restrictions lasted approximately an hour and a half, and officially, no explosions or damage were reported. Russian authorities remain silent about the source of the drones, but given Kaliningrad's location, the first possibility that comes to mind is Ukraine. We know that Kyiv has been continuously expanding its long-range drone capabilities and can strike deep targets even beyond Moscow. If these drones truly belong to Ukraine, it means Kaliningrad is now within range, not just logistically, but militarily as well. But regardless of the source, the message was clear. The military void, infantry gone, S-400s pulled, naval infantry depleted, is now being felt in Kaliningrad's sky. The fortress that once threatened NATO is now trying to protect itself from drones. Kaliningrad was left defenseless, and the first to notice was its neighbor Poland. Warsaw's response came in multiple layers. First, it blinded Russia's eyes, then it built the physical wall, and finally, it sealed the border. The first move targeted intelligence. Between 2024 and 2025, Poland shut down Russian consulates one by one, Poznan, Krakow, and finally Gdansk in December 2025. These were not ordinary diplomatic buildings. The Gdansk consulate had operated for years as a SIGINT center monitoring NATO activities in the Baltic Sea. Its rooftop antennas listened to the port, NATO ships, and radio traffic. Poznan was a critical intelligence node monitoring NATO exercises, tank shipments, and ammunition trains in western Poland. Russia no longer has any official presence in Poland outside the Warsaw embassy. Kaliningrad's garrison lost its eyes on western Poland. A military unit left in the dark cannot make defense plans. While eyes were being blinded, the physical wall began to rise. Polish Prime Minister Tusk described the Eastern Shield project as the largest fortification operation on the eastern border since 1945. Intensive construction began in January 2026. With a $2.5 billion budget, a three-layered defense line is being built along 700 kilometers of border. Anti-tank trenches 4 meters deep, 6 rows of concrete dragon's teeth barriers, camouflaged bunkers, and mine-laying infrastructure. The goal is to fortify 38% of the border by the end of 2026. Before the military fortification was even complete, the commercial face of the border had already closed. In January 2026, Poland completely shut down the Granoll and Goldop border crossings with Kaliningrad. Only 2 crossings remained, and they too are effectively non-functional. At most 5 vehicles pass per hour, with queues reaching 8 to 12 hours. When insurance companies classified the Kaliningrad route as a war zone risk and refused to insure vehicles, even the crossings that were open on paper effectively closed for the transport sector. The result? The region's 18,000 truck drivers are unemployed. And on top of all this, Poland conducted the CROD 2026 exercise in April to May 2026. A full-scale war scenario with the president, prime minister, and all ministers participating. The scenario? A major conflict with the eastern neighbor. Martial law declaration and the government's relocation to secret command centers were rehearsed. Poland's defense minister framed it clearly. This is not just Poland's border. It is the border of the European Union and NATO. Kaliningrad's southern gate has been sealed, and the key is in Warsaw's pocket. The southern gate is sealed. What about the Eastern Gate? Kaliningrad's survival depended for decades on a single line, the railway running through Lithuania to the Russian mainland. Fuel, cement, steel, coal, food, everything feeding 1 million people, and the military garrison traveled along this line. Cut this line and you cut Kaliningrad's breath. Lithuania tested this in 2022. In June, citing EU sanctions, it restricted the transit of strategic goods like steel and cement. Kaliningrad's governor raised the alarm. We will lose 40 to 50% of our transit goods. The Kremlin furiously threatened serious consequences, but Lithuania didn't back down because it was a NATO member and there was no real force behind Putin's threats. The bluff was called. The justification for a full cutoff came from an unexpected place in November 2025. Smuggling balloons carrying contraband cigarettes sent from Belarus to Lithuania paralyzed Vilnius airport. Lithuania recorded this as a deliberate hybrid attack by Belarus and closed the border crossings. But the real impact of the balloon crisis was that it opened another door. Lithuanian Railways, citing compliance with US and UK sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft, halted the transit of Russian petroleum products to Kaliningrad. First, a 21-day transition period was initiated with no new applications accepted. On November 21st, the period expired and Lukoil's oil flow was completely cut off. The numbers tell the scale of the cutoff. In 2024, 371,000 tons of petroleum products were transported along this line, 345,000 tons of which belonged to Lukoil. Now, zero. And this isn't just civilian fuel. The Baltic Fleet's ships and the Iskander missile launchers also depend on it.